Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Salton Sea Authority Board of Directors meeting for Thursday, January 26th, 2023. Pursuant to Assembly Bill 361, this meeting is being conducted both in person and at the County of Imperial Board of Supervisors chambers via Zoom webinar. I'd like to call the meeting to order by starting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Director Dockstetter, if you could please lead us. Could you turn on your button? There we go, so that they may hear you. Thank you.
Please rise. Thank you. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Director Dockstetter. They have them in the back. Okay, at this point, I'd like to ask Board Secretary to conduct roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Pancarte,
Here.
Director Kelly. Director Santillanes.
Here.
Director Tortes. Director Estrada. Director Aguilar is not able to make it this morning. Director Cardenas.
Present. Good morning.
Director Dockstetter.
Present.
Director Perez.
He is on his way, should be here in a few minutes.
And Director Gutierrez.
Present. Mr. Chairman, I noticed that Director Tortes is online. He just did not unmute to acknowledge his presence.
Yeah, Director Cortez here. Sorry, at the mic muted.
And I understand that Director Estrada is a bit detained, but should be joining us shortly.
You have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Okay, with that, we will go ahead and go right into the public comment. This public comment time is set aside for comments on matters that are not action items or on the action agenda. You are invited to speak to any specific action item at the time that that item is called. All other agenda items should be addressed at their time. Any member of the public may address the board relating to any matter within the authority's jurisdiction. Those present in this room who wish to speak, if you have not already filled out a speaker form, they're in the back, you can do so and present it to the clerk of the board on your right. To the commenters via Zoom, please use the Zoom raise hand option feature. On your phone, press *9 to be acknowledged. Once you're acknowledged, state your name for the record and please address the chairperson of this board. Remarks shall be limited to a maximum of 3 minutes. And California law prohibits that any member of this board on taking action of it on any item that is not on today's agenda. So having said that, giving time to those that are connecting, we will start with requests to speak forms completed so far in-house. I have Renteria. Where are you? Here we are. Please don't forget to push the red button and turn it. There we go. Thank you, sir.
Good morning, Chairperson and board members. My name is Mario Renteria. I'm a district representative for Senator Steve Padilla. I just wanted to quickly come by and reintroduce myself. I've been with Senator Ben West for 4 years now and making the transition over to Padilla's office. And I look forward to working with you in any Salton Sea related issues that we can work on together. Thank you.
Thank you. Glad to see you here. Do we have anybody else in the room that did not get a perhaps opportunity to fill out the form? Okay, nobody rushing the microphones. Madam Secretary, do you see any raised hands online?
Not yet, Mr. Chairman, but let me check. Now, where did it- where did it go? I see no, if I take it back, there are two hands raised.
Okay, since you have larger screens than I do, I'll let you go ahead and activate their microphones and call out by name who will be next.
Nathan White, please.
Hi, this is Nathan White with Ages Inc. I just wanted to thank everybody, the board members, all of the people online here for all the years of service over the last, decades, it feels like. I think there's a lot of progress happening, and that's exciting news. Just a couple of comments from my perspective. I'm just kind of making a recommendation that the Salton Sea Authority take a more active role in kind of the process that California Natural Resources Agency has been doing when it comes to the long range plan, as well as the seawater importation. I know it's going to be discussed today that there's going to be a lot less water for the Salton Sea. That being considered, some of the plans that were analyzed anticipated having more water in the basin. But the fact is that there's less water. Rains are helping, but it's not going to fix the issue. So the processes that Natural Resources Agency has taken, although those are great, some issues come about when it comes to, maybe the perspective of holistic thinking and a science-based approach. I would also recommend that the board look at regional climate models to show what happens as the sea recedes and how that could affect the Colorado River Basin as a whole, as well as the opportunity, if it were full, how that can affect the upper elevation water banks. So, our team at Ages has created non-import as well as import proposals, and some of those have had limited success with the Natural Resources Agency, but I think the Salton Sea Authority can take a more active role in that. And we're excited that the Army Corps of Engineers is going to be more involved in the coming years. Hopefully that is going to help with a more objective approach to all of the solutions that are available, and also look at ideas that might be out there. Just on a personal note, we might have private investors that are looking at putting money into the Salton Sea, and we can have those conversations in a different forum. But there is a lot of excitement on restoration, and the opportunity for restoration could be fully restoring the sea. So thank you for everyone's time, and appreciate all the hard work that's going in here.
Thank you, Mr. White. Next speaker.
Mr. Sefton?
Hello, my name is Tom Sefton. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm a member of the Desert Shores Restoration Channels Restoration Project Oversight Committee. And I want to welcome the new board members to the Salton Sea Authority, and appreciate the service of the longtime members of the Salton Sea Authority board and staff. We respectfully request that the Salton Sea Authority staff communicate with us on the status of the RFP documents being prepared for the Desert Shores Channels Restoration Project. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Sefton.
And those are the only hands, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We will now go on to board member comments. This is a time set aside for members of the board to share their thoughts and concerns regarding general authority matters not on today's agenda. May I ask questions of staff and request that items be added to agendas for a later date. The Brown Act expressly prohibits lengthy board member discussions of matters not on today's agenda. The board may, at its discretion, by a 4/5 vote, add items deemed to be an emergency to the agenda in order to engage in public comment and public disclosure. So having said that, we will go ahead and start by welcoming the new members to the Salton Sea Authority before we let them chime in into member comments. I would like to welcome Director Gina Dockstetter, representing IID. Welcome to the group.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity that's been given to me. I take it very seriously. Salton Sea is not out of sight, out of mind. Tomorrow I will be making the trek again to Palm Desert, up the old 111, which is one of my favorite routes to go. So just thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Excellent. Welcome aboard. I do know that newly appointed Director John Aguilar has a conflict of interest with the recent appointment, and he's clearing up his calendar so that he can join us at future meetings. I do believe I see Director Gutierrez, Riverside County Supervisor, District 5, who has also joined this body. Are you there to make a comment? Or is this just a monitoring station right now?
Supervisor Gutierrez is not able to attend the meeting, but I am the liaison for the Salton Sea Authority. And I am actually happy to be here as well. And he's proud to be here, be a part of the Salton Sea and everything that comes with it.
Thank you for your comments. We will now go to board member comments. We'll start in-house. We can go ahead and start with Vice Chair Santillanes. No comments. Director Dockstader, any comments other than your, okay? Director Cardenas.
Yes, good morning. Thank you folks for being here today. I know that we have a very important agenda. I do want to welcome our state and federal partners who made the trip and accepted our invitation. Looking forward to your presentation. And also again, want to welcome our new directors. Welcome to the sausage factory here at the Salton Sea Authority. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Cardenas. Director Perez.
None at this time. Echo the same sentiment.
Thank you, sir. We will give Director Kelly a minute or so to settle in. We will go to those participating online. Director Chairman Tortes.
Thank you, sir. I just want to thank the state and federal agencies also for being here, and I hope this is going to be a good, great year with momentum for the Salton Sea. I know we've had several plans, that we've been looking at for several years, and the tribe is steadfast in supporting any of the ideas that help mitigate anything to do with the sea. So I just want to put that out there. The tribe is willing to support any way to get this.
Thank you, sir. Madam Secretary, do we have any other directors online? I know Director Gutierrez's name shows up there, but he's not there. While you are
don't
checking
think
that,
so.
well, no, thank you. Director Kelly, any comments?
No, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have a couple follow-up comments.
Okay.
I do want to acknowledge our general manager, Enrique Martinez, who's here from Imperial Irrigation District. And I also want to acknowledge Mr. Jeffrey Holbrook, who's our general counsel from Imperial Irrigation District as well.
Thank you, sir. I myself, for my comments, welcome to the new members. Welcome representatives who have joined us today. I know that you have traveled to make our today's meeting, so I will not delay this any longer. We already did section 4A, which is introduction of the new members. We will go on to section 4B, recognition of outgoing Salton Sea Authority board members, of which I don't see them here. But in essence, this is a resolution of the Salton Sea Authority. This would be under resolution number 23-01, 23-02, and 23-03. This resolution of the Board of Directors of the Salton Sea Authority would be expressing appreciation and commendation to Director James Hanks, Anthony Bianco, and Jeff Hewitt upon their retirement from service to the Salton Sea Authority. And I will not go as to all the whereases because they, for example, Supervisor Hanks was in here for about a decade and a half, so we did not have enough paper to do that. But I will go back to the end, and it says, be it resolved that the Board of Directors of the Salton Sea Authority and staff join in expressing appreciation and gratitude to Director James Hanks, Director Anthony Bianco, and Director Jeff Hewitt, and these are individual each ones, for their many contributions to the Salton Sea Authority and the public they have served so diligently, and in extending sincere best wishes to them for continued happiness, success in their future and current endeavors. And so I'd like to go ahead and take a roll call vote on this resolution. They are not here. I will put up a sample of what the resolutions look like. And then upon their schedules, we will have them in chambers to present that.
Would you like to invite director comments?
Oh, yes. So before we take a vote, I will go ahead and invite director comments.
I would just on behalf of Imperial Irrigation District, do appreciate the acknowledgement of 16 years of service for Mr. Jim Hanks. He's quite an asset to Imperial Irrigation District and the Salton Sea. So I do recognize and appreciate the acknowledgement, and hopeful that he will continue to stick around and be an advocate of the Salton Sea. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Cardenas.
I too, as well, on behalf of the County of Riverside, want to thank, obviously, Mr. Hanks, Mr. Bianco, and Mr. Hewitt for their work on behalf of the Salton Sea Authority. But if I can just express my gratitude and my sincere, I guess, love, if you will, for the work of Mr. Hanks. Because those 16 years are no joke. And I learned a lot from him over the course of all those years, going back to the State Assembly. And him being an advocate on behalf of the Salton Sea Authority, being an advocate for the Salton Sea, being an advocate on behalf of Imperial County and the Southern California region. Very thoughtful, historian. You have a question, he'll give you the long answer and maybe eventually the short one. And I'm not sure if he's watching, but I say this because I'm very pleased and happy to be in this position that I am today as a result of learning quite a bit from him. And so, Mr. Hanks, you're gonna be missed. I'm gonna miss you. I'm gonna miss your advocacy. I'm gonna miss you when you push back on issues, and also when you present your great ideas. Don't forget about us, no matter where you end up. I heard a bird say something about the Central Valley and maybe other areas as well. But just know that on my behalf, I'm sure my colleagues here in the Salton Sea Authority as well, but on my behalf, I just want to say muchas gracias for being a good friend, as a policymaker, and as well, just a good individual. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Perez.
I would like to say, also along the same lines as Director Perez, that, Mr. Hanks, when I came on board 6 years ago, he was just that example of a leader and a mentor and an elder, and, was very open to share his creative ideas, and, just much respect for Mr. Hanks. So thank you for your service.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
If I could, Mr. President, I did receive a note by one of the viewers that we need to speak more closely into our microphone.
Okay. Thank you. Director Kelly, Director Dockstetter, any comments?
Join in. I had many agreements and disagreements with Jim Hanks over the years. I got to see him on Saturday, and we're still having good debates, but I wish him well. And his new adventures. Mr. Bianco, we got to speak about Salton Sea issues most recently this past summer. And I know his heart was in the right place. And I'm glad that we still have open lines on that. And then Mr. Hewitt with Mr. Perez have been very good partners from Riverside, and I hope that that continues. That's all I have.
Thank you. We'll go online, Chairman Torches.
Yes, I just wanted to, thank, just like the rest of us here, Mr. Hanks, Mr. Bianco, and Mr. Hewitt, all directors of the Salton Sea that played a momentous part of the Salton Sea and getting us to where we are now. We wouldn't be able to be here without their effort and their advocacy. And I know, like we all know here, that we're going to continue to work with them. They really aren't going anywhere. We're still going to be knocking at their door, asking them and calling them in the middle of the night. So just be expecting that, gentlemen. And again, thank you for your service.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any other directors online? I like to add that, I knew Director Hanks from private industry before, when he was in education, through a few projects that I was trying to build in his area. And back then I met him as somebody who was feisty, told you exactly what you were and weren't going to do, and stuck to his guns. Little did I expect that about 20 years later, I'd be serving side by side, feisty, tell you exactly what you're going to do and not do, and stick by his guns. And so I am sure that we will hear from him every now and again. And I actually do look forward to that. So with that, if there are no additional comments, Patrick, do you?
Just one last comment very quickly, going back to Mr. Bianco. I forgot to mention that he would always raise the question, and I think this is a question that we need to be very mindful of as we move forward, and that's because I think it was a very legitimate question. Why do we exist? I mean, he would always bring this up and what's going on, and would be a little critical as to why does it seem like we're going in circles here, and what's going on at the federal level, and what's going on at the state level. And so let's just be mindful of those points, because I think that, folks like Mr. Hanks in his 16 years and folks like Anthony Bianco and those of us that are here, we want to see something already. We want to see dirt moved already. Right? And things are happening, but let's just be mindful of the point that, we have partners at every level of government, but his question was spot on. Why do we exist? Just want to leave it at that.
Thank you, sir.
So thank you for the opportunity to comment, Mr. Chairman. As the executive director and on behalf of staff, I can testify that each one of these former directors contributed greatly to our efforts. Director Hewitt is a member of the Finance Committee, and his wisdom and knowledge, he would test things and challenge things to make sure that we're getting it right. Director Bianco, he would have those same conversations. As you know, I served with him on CVWD's board. And I'm hoping that I believe that before he left this, he understood why we exist, but it's a continuing process of convincing people that we are here to serve the people of the Imperial and Coachella Valleys and to protect the interests and lives and livelihoods of the people who live here from changes that are occurring at the sea, which is one of the main topics that we're going to address today. And then Director Hanks, serving on this board for 6 years and working alongside him, I found it a blessing, just simply a blessing. I think some of his concepts, some of his ideas still resonate with me, and I think are if incubated, can provide a potential part of the solution to the challenges we face. So while he has left this board, his imprint on this organization and the community in the region will be very long lasting. And it's been an honor to serve and work with all of them.
Thank you, Patrick.
Mr. Chair, if there's no other comments, I'm prepared to make a motion.
Go ahead, sir.
I'd like to make a motion that we accept the resolutions regarding the outgoing Salton Sea Authority board members as presented.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Director Cardenas, a second by Director Perez. If there is no additional comment or discussion, I'd like to ask Secretary to take a vote.
I would just like to note, Mr. President, for Mr. Supervisor Gutierrez representative, that his representative is not allowed to vote, only he can vote in person. So if he's not available to vote, then he should just abstain from voting.
Correct. And for those of you here at the dais, don't forget to turn on your microphone when you speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Flacarte,
Yes, yes, and yes.
Director Kelly,
Yes.
Director Santillanes,
Yes.
Director Cortez,
Yes.
Director Estrada. Yes. Director Cardenas,
Yes.
Director Dockstader,
Yes.
and Director Perez.
Yes.
Unanimous, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, madam. Okay, I look forward to presenting the document to all three at a future date. We will now go out to agenda item number 5, discussion and possible action. 5A, 1 through 5. I invite any comment, discussion, any items to pull.
Mr. Chair, if there is no comments or any request for these items to be pulled, I'm prepared to make a motion.
Okay. Are there any comments from the public before we entertain motions on this item? Being none, we have a motion by Director Cardenas. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion by Director Cardenas, a second by Vice Chair Santillanes. Madam, call for the vote.
Director Flacarte,
Yes.
Director Kelly,
Yes.
Director Santillanes,
Yes.
Director Cortez,
Yes.
Director Estrada, Director Cardenas,
Yes.
Director Dockstader,
Yes.
Director Perez.
Yes.
Unanimous, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Going on to item 5B. I'd like to invite our Executive Director to introduce item 5B in the discussion and presentation.
Thank you, Mr. President. This item is a continuing item from our previous several meetings arising out of the challenges being faced on the Colorado River. Our partners at the state and federal level have been keeping us apprised of the situation. There are obviously consequences from every choices, every decision that's made. We learned of an agreement last month, and we had a conversation about that agreement last month. We weren't able to have representation to answer the questions that were raised both by the members. I apologize, I just turned my microphone on, so I hope the public heard that. By the members and by the public, and so we have representatives here today, both from the state and federal government. And I will introduce Mario to kick it off.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Mario Llanos, Deputy Assistant Secretary for California Natural Resources. Sorry, I'm hunching over here. I'm tall, so I'm trying to get close to the mic here. Thank you very much for having us today.
Mario, let me just say that microphone is a dynamic microphone, so if you put it up,
Okay,
it will go ahead and pick up a much wider range than with these two.
perfect. Thank you. thank you for agendizing us this month and allowing us to come back and give a full update on the agreement that was announced at the end of November. I realized that agreement came out and the last the December Salton Sea Authority Board meeting happened shortly after that, and there just wasn't enough time to get our staff. So I sincerely apologize on behalf of Reclamation and CNRA for not being able to get here to make that meeting and to answer questions. But we're here today and we want to go through that agreement in detail. And we have a presentation today, and with us today, myself representing the state, and then with Bureau of Reclamation, we have Lower Colorado River Basin Director Jackie Gold, and then we have Salton Sea Program Manager Jeremy Brooks, and then on the line we have from Bureau of Reclamation hydrologic engineer Alan Butler. And then we have Coachella Valley Water District Director Peter Nelson. And then also joining us online is from IID Department Water Department Manager Tina Shields. And then also joining us from the state online, we have Lisa Leen Mager, who's the Senior Advisor for Communications at CNRA. We have Tom Gibson, General Counsel for Department of Water Resources. We have James Newcomb, who's the Assistant Deputy Director for Department of Water Resources in the Salton Sea Management Program. And I just wanted to just briefly go through our agenda today and what we're going to discuss.
If I may, Mr. Chair, may I make an inquiry real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
Was an invitation extended to Secretary Crowfoot?
Yeah, Secretary Crowfoot, thank you for bringing that up. So he regrets that he couldn't be here today. He's traveling this morning. And he made every attempt to be here today, but he was not able to attend.
Thank you, sir.
And if I could, he did call me and personally apologize for his inability, but he has family matters to attend to.
Thank you.
Great. So so briefly, I just wanted to we wanted to just have a quick conversation on and just kind of briefly go over Colorado River hydrological conditions, and Alan Butler from Reclamation will be giving a presentation on that. He's online. And then after that, we'll have a presentation on Colorado River conditions and importance of voluntary conservation. And Peter Nelson, Director at Coachella Valley Water District, will be speaking about that. And then we'll go briefly over the Salton Sea modeling and the impacts of the Salton Sea, the water modeling. And Tina Shields will be presenting that item. And then lastly, we'll give kind of an overview on the commitments agreement and what's in that agreement. And Jeremy Brooks from Reclamation will be discussing that. So
Repeat all those once again. For the public and also for us.
Yeah.
Okay. So first item that we'll be discussing are Colorado River hydrological conditions. And that'll be Alan Butler will be giving a presentation for Reclamation. He's the engineer. And then next we'll have Colorado River conditions and the importance of voluntary conservation. That'll be Peter Nelson giving that presentation from Coachella Valley Water District. And then we'll discuss Salton Sea modeling and potential impacts to the Salton Sea. That'll be Tina Shields at IID. And then an overview on the commitments agreement will be presented by Jeremy Brooks, Salton Sea Program Manager at Reclamation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Bureau of Reclamation Regional Director Jackie Gold.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you, Chairman Lacarte, members of the board, those on video and those in person today, and Director O'Dowd for asking us to come and share some information about what we have been doing here the last couple of months. And did want to echo Mario's apology for not being here in December. It was short notice and we couldn't, we wouldn't have done you justice if we had rolled in and tried to present things, and it gave us time to provide a better presentation for you and summary of what's been going on and what we're looking at in the future. So the Bureau of Reclamation has really been involved in the sea for 30 years now. I've been involved for over the last 7 years. I came in 7 years ago, and one thing that was important for me was to be able to really bring our partnerships together and leverage cooperation and communication through the stakeholders and interest groups at the sea. And I think we've done a really decent job of that. We've created a federal team that gets together monthly and talks about opportunities at the sea, and we've been able to leverage $20 million of funding to support some of those activities in that time. We've funded projects for dust suppression, exposed playa, wildlife habitat, and implement some research activities and data collection. Some of the things that we have done at the sea in the last several years was we've provided $2 million to the Salton Sea Authority's Desert Shores Project and boat ramp access. We've worked on the design of Audubon's Bombay Beach project. We've supported dust suppression and aquatic restoration projects and funded some research initiatives. We've also worked closely with the city of Whiteville on their wetlands project. Along with funding those opportunities, we've made lands available for projects around the sea as well as being a landowner. And we've provided nearly 3,000 acres of projects that were implemented on reclamation's land that figure that will dramatically increase in the near future as we have more opportunities to support activities. A lot of things have been going on with respect to conservation in the Colorado River Basin. It goes back to the interim guidelines in 2007, where basin states, primarily lower basin states, had agreed to mandatory cuts in their entitlements to Colorado River water. Knowing that that was not enough, there was begin discussions in 2018 about a drought contingency plan in the lower basin states. And in 2019, additional voluntary contributions were offered up to help support storage in Lake Mead. 2022, again, noticing that the lake levels were declining and we needed to do something. The Lower Colorado Basin region, working with the lower basin states, came up with a plan to come up with another 500,000 acre feet of water for system storage in Lake Mead. And we did meet that target. And then in 2023, let me say 2022, we started talking about protection volumes in Lake Mead and Lake Powell, knowing that the reservoirs continued to decline and that we needed to look at protecting our infrastructure. If we can't, if we drop below our ability to remove water from Powell and Mead, then no one gets water in the lower basin. And we're doing everything we can to keep that from happening. So we've had our modelers, Alan Butler is one of them, in our Boulder, Colorado office, come up with an estimate of what it would take to preserve the elevations in Lake Mead closely to what they are. And we came up with another 2 to 4 million acre feet as being needed to do that. And we again entered into conversations with basin states to see what can be done to help in that effort. What that's led into is what we are now working on is our supplemental environmental impact statement that is looking at providing, is using the environmental impact statement from the 2007 guidelines to supplement that and come up with additional tools to use as we head into this year and next year and the year after that, to identify identify if worsening hydrology or same hydrology plays out, what's going to be needed to keep the system in operation. And several of you have heard of our supplemental EIS that we have going on. We're expecting a draft of that coming out this spring, a final coming out by the summer of this year, with a record of decision on that environmental impact statement coming out in the end of July, in anticipation of the August 24-month study, which would set operation conditions in 2024. It's a very accelerated timeline. We're moving fast on it. We've had public webinars, and if you weren't able to participate in those, then we do have them online. There's so you can, and we also have a website that is we're posting to as information comes available, I think, or we have been posting the comments that we received through the public scoping period. Those will probably we update that in batches. Our last batch should be updated probably by the end of next week to see those public comments and being transparent in what we're doing with that. Knowing that the Salton Sea is really not physically connected to the Colorado River, but is certainly an integral part to our Colorado River operations, even though we're 250 miles away from Hoover Dam, that we came together with the state Department of Natural Resources, Wade Crowfoot, Commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation, Camille Tootin, came together with Imperial Irrigation District and Coachella Valley Water District and Torres Martinez to come up with a commitments agreement moving forward. And Jeremy Brooks is going to provide some of those details of that agreement, so I won't go into that. It was 6 months of work to pull that agreement together, and the agencies, IID, Coachella, you've all been involved in that discussion and did a Herculean effort to be able to pull an agreement of that kind together in that short period of time. So the agreement doesn't result in any direct water conservation actions or impacts to the sea. But what it does is it sets the stage for a discussion on potential voluntary conservation in the Imperial Valley and provides a substantial federal commitment in voluntary conservation. Once the voluntary conservation agreements are executed, it brings in a commitment to provide additional funding for the state of California and their Salton Sea Management Plan.
Ma'am, can you repeat that once more, please? And can you answer the question as to how much funding we're potentially considering here?
Yeah. There's, so the idea is that if conservation, system conservation is provided by Imperial Irrigation District and or the Coachella Valley Water District, that we did some modeling analysis that showed there could be a quicker decline of the sea than there would have been without it. And with that in mind, we came up with an agreement, $250 million, 25 million, 23. Yep. Yeah. Right. Yeah, so it's a two-part agreement. The first part really helps to get provide staffing for key partners so that we have people that can work on the projects and get them in place and commitment to staffing. And then the second part of the agreement, the bigger chunk of the money wouldn't be released until conservation agreements were put in place by Imperial Irrigation District and Coachella Valley Water District to help provide the quickening of the projects identified in the Salton Sea Management Plan to put in place at the Salton Sea.
I make an inquiry, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Just in regards to the fiscal sponsor of that money, would that ultimately be managed by CRNA in regards to the 228 million, or who ultimately would be responsible for the stewardship of those funds?
We would provide that money to the California Department of Natural Resources. And my understanding is they would be the caretakers of that money. One part of the agreement, is to stand up a principals group to make sure that we continue to make progress on work at the Salton Sea. I know that Wade Crowfoot has invited Director O'Dowd to be part of that principals group, and our first meeting is next Friday. I'll be part of that group as well, along with Commissioner Tootin. We'll do that, and to just the focus of the group is going to be to make sure the projects are being taken seriously and implemented in the sea. You know, hold project sponsors accountable for getting work done. Provide an overall strategy for how we're going to how things are going to line up based on Salton Sea Management Program and the implementation of that. So with that, if there's, I'll stop for some questions.
If I may just make you made a statement regarding the Salton Sea not physically being connected to the Colorado River. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that?
The water from the sea comes from the return flows from the natural drainage area to the sea, but also the return flows from IID and Coachella Valley Water District. So when you think about you think of this of Hoover Dam, the Colorado River, and then the Salton Sea sitting out here in Southern California, 250 miles away. It isn't necessarily a direct linkage, but it certainly is impacted by the operations of Colorado River water.
The specific terminology and meaning in regards to not physically connected, is that a Bureau of Reclamation term?
It's just it's not a technical term at all, no.
Is it an
Do you have a
assumption?
better term?
No, I'm just wondering if it's an assumption or if if I'm trying to understand. That's a very important set of words to me matter. So we worked really hard to weld the Salton Sea to the Colorado River. And so I'm just trying to determine if that's an assessment coming from the Bureau of Reclamation, or if maybe that's just an assumption that's being made that the Colorado River is not physically connected to the Salton Sea.
I've used it in a broad sense to show that there's really a separation, and some people working on Colorado River issues may not see that the Salton Sea is an integral part to that. And I would appreciate any feedback. If you have a different way that you'd like that characterized, I'd be open to a lesson.
I think you're just walking into a landmine at the moment. But I'd also add that there's a significant influence from the international border and the effluent coming from Mexicali. So there's definitely a federal piece in multiple ways, as Mr. Cardenas is pointing, and that I'm also offering to you.
Thank you, Director Kelly.
Thank you.
So I'd like to introduce Alan Butler. He's one of our modelers. He's online, and he's going to help walk through some of the hydrology and modeling for us. So Alan.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you all for the opportunity to present today and for allowing me to present remotely. As Jackie said, I'm Alan Butler. I'm the group manager of the Lower Colorado Basin Research and Modeling Team based at the University of Colorado. Bear with me while I share my slides. Okay, I believe everybody should be seeing my slides now. As Jackie indicated, we're going to be providing a very quick system status on the hydrologic conditions in the Colorado River Basin, and then move on to, again, a very brief discussion about some of those future risks that we see to the system and why those led to us starting down this supplemental environmental impact statement process. As this slide indicates, Lake Powell and, sorry about that. Lake Powell and Lake Mead are both historically low right now. Right now, Lake Powell is sitting at 24% full, or just below elevation 3525. And Lake Mead is sitting at 28% full, or just right around elevation 1045, both with 5.5 million and 7.4 million acre feet in storage respectively. The total system storage, when we look at the storage in the other reservoirs in the system besides Lake Powell and Lake Mead, is 33% full. This is down from last year at the same time, where the total system storage was 37% of capacity. However, I get to offer a little bit of cautious optimism with the current conditions. So this figure illustrates the current snowpack in the upper Colorado River Basin, which is where we get 90% of our runoff. The light blue line shows the current snow accumulation for this year, for water year 2023, while that dark blue or black line shows the median snow accumulation for the past 30 years. And so you can see that for this day, for January 22nd, the beginning of this week, we have a well above average snowpack, looking right about 144% of average at the beginning of this week. So we're experiencing some very substantial and good snowfall in the upper basin, which is good news for the basin. But just want to be cautiously optimistic that we don't know what the rest of the snow accumulation season holds. What we can see in this red line is last year, 2022, we experienced a similar great accumulation there in December and early January, and then it essentially snowed very little for the rest of January and February. So this is just a reminder that even though conditions are good right now, we don't quite know what the rest of the winter will hold, and things can change very quickly. So it's not time to let our foot off the gas pedal, so to speak. This current snowpack translates to a forecasted runoff for the April through July period of 117% of average. And then that would be a water year runoff into Lake Powell of 109% of average. This next figure shows that historical runoff into Lake Powell going back to 1964, and then shows 3 different forecasts for the runoff this year. That solid green bar on the very far right is that value I just mentioned, the over the 109% of average, 109% of average is that mid-January most probable forecast or median forecast. And then the red bar and the dark blue bar show a range of where the conditions could end based on how the snow accumulation plays out for the rest of the year. And you can see that there is a chance, it's the 10th percentile, so a 10% chance that it could be 75% of average or even lower. And then there's a 10% chance that we could have a runoff of 155% of average or even higher. So because it's January, there's still a lot of the snow accumulation season left. There's still a very wide range to where that runoff is. But again, we're cautiously optimistic that based on current conditions, we're gonna hopefully get a little bit above average runoff this year. So now moving on from the cautious optimism of the current snowpack and moving forward to some of those infrastructure challenges that Regional Director Gold spoke to, and that led us to start the supplemental environmental impact statement process. This figure is a schematic of Glen Canyon Dam. The elevation 3490 is what we refer to as minimum power pool. That's the elevation where if we fall below that, we can no longer generate electricity from the dam, but we also then are no longer able to release water through the turbines, and we have to rely on what we refer to as the jet tubes or the bypass tubes, which are located down at elevation 3370. Because we can no longer release water through those bypass tubes, the total volume of water that we release can be constrained, and we only have 4 of those jet tubes available to us. So there's instances that as the elevation in Glen Canyon Dam declines, we can no longer even release the required 7 million acre feet based on the interim guidelines release requirements. So we really have, it is there's power issues there, but it's also a water delivery infrastructure challenge once we fall below 3490. And then once we fall to dead pool or elevation 3370, there's really no more storage in the reservoir that we can rely on. We can only release what water naturally comes into Lake Powell. At Lake Mead, it's a little bit different setup based on our intakes. At elevation 950, that's the elevation where we can no longer generate electricity, but we do have intakes that go down to elevation 895, and we can the intakes for the power plant and release are at those same levels. But again, if we fall below 950, we can no longer generate electricity. And then if we reach elevation 895, which is dead pool at Lake Mead, we can only release the water that comes into Hoover Dam. So we would be making, there'd be very low releases coming out of Lake Mead in those situations. So those infrastructure challenges and protecting those key elevations of 3490 at Powell and 950 at Mead are coupled with the possibility for some very low flows either this year or next year or the year after, are what led us down to conduct the supplemental environmental impact statement. This slide has a lot of information, and I apologize for that. I'm not going to be able to do it justice in the time allotted today. I'll very briefly describe it and then refer you to our recordings of the supplemental environmental impact statement public webinar, which are available on that SEIS website where it's described in more detail. But this is one illustration of where Lake Powell and Lake Mead could end up if we experience some low runoff over the next 4 years. That would be about the table on the very far left shows what that runoff is as a percent of average. So it'd be 47% of average this year, followed by 61% of average, 26% of average, and then 59% of average. And the red line shows where Lake Powell would decline to, which is well below that elevation 3490 as early as next year, and then approaching dead pool, not quite getting to dead pool, but approaching dead pool in those subsequent years. As I mentioned, in these cases, if this table shows that Lake Powell would only be releasing 5.4 million acre feet and 5 million acre feet in 2025 and 2026 because of those limitations in the bypass tubes. And this would result in Lake Mead also declining rapidly to below elevation 950 as early as 2025, and then down to that dead pool elevation in 2026. And once you release that dead pool elevation, there would only be 6.3 million acre feet released from Hoover Dam when the total demand is above 9 million acre feet for all lower basin users in Mexico, and other losses below Lake Mead. So the supplemental environmental impact statement, we provided 4 different modeling scenarios looking at protecting elevation 3490 at Powell and 950 at Mead. And focusing on the green one, I'll just highlight that this protects those 2 elevations, but to protect those elevations, Powell's release would have to be reduced to 3 million acre feet in 2025. And subsequently, Mead's release would be reduced to 3.8 million acre feet in 2025. So even lower releases to protect those 2 elevations. So these are modeling scenarios which help illustrate the magnitude of the problem we're facing at Powell and Mead. They're not the alternatives that will be analyzed in the SEIS. They're just informational, hopefully informative, again, just to help quantify and illustrate the magnitude of the issues we're facing. Wanted to acknowledge that there's been a lot of work done to date. Regional Director Gould mentioned several of the efforts over the last several years at conserving water, and that's had a very noticeable impact to Lake Mead's elevations. This figure shows Lake Mead's historical elevation going back to 2007. And if we focus at 2002, that top gray line is right there about 1045, which is where we ended last year. All of those different colored blobs are different types of conserved water that sit in Lake Mead. And if you did not have all of that conserved water in Lake Mead, the elevation would be closer to 950. So we've added about 90 feet of elevation to Lake Mead just through these conservation efforts over the last several years and decade. So with that, just want to wrap up with a few final points. Although our current precipitation is currently above average, 2022 showed us that conditions can easily degrade and quickly degrade. And so again, just we're cautiously optimistic about the current hydrology and current snowpack in the upper basin. If we have below average runoff in 2023, we are vulnerable to falling below elevation 3525 and 1020 at Mead, some elevations that we looked at previously. And if we would need about 2.5 million acre feet extra conservation to keep the reservoirs above that if we had below average hydrology. That number would be lower with the above average hydrology we're currently anticipating. And then even with a good year, we can quickly be back in the same position we're in today or worse. So even if we do get that 117% of average runoff this year, Lake Powell will increase its elevation a little bit, but we could very quickly be back in the same position next year and looking at a dry runoff. And so the supplemental environmental impact statement is looking at tools to manage the reservoirs when we have those extreme low hydrology and runoff scenarios. And finally, each year we fall short of protecting the elevations, whatever elevations we choose at Lake Powell and Lake Mead. The volume needed to stabilize the system in future years only increases. And so with that, I'm happy to take any questions, or I can pass it on to Peter Nelson.
Do we have any questions from members of this board here? Do we have any online questions from directors online?
Hey, Alan, this is Peter. If you could go back to slide 4. If there's, we'll see if there's any other questions, but I'm going to talk to slide 4 for a little bit. And then you could leave it up, then I'm going to go to slide 8. So if you're hanging around, I'd appreciate that.
Director Pettis?
Absolutely,
I was
Peter.
just wondering if there was discussion around timelines. For how long will this occur? If that makes any sense?
I just want to make sure I understand the question. How long will the supplemental environmental impacts statement, like timelines associated with that, or I'm sorry if
The
I'm.
transfer itself, I guess, the amount of water that's going to be conserved, for how many years are we talking about? That will be conserved and potentially will not be going into the Salton Sea, for example, to runoff.
I can speak to that real briefly.
Okay.
So there's discussions on a voluntary conservation agreement with IID and Reclamation, and that will get into more modeling that will kind of make that clear. But that agreement is a 4-year horizon. So it'd be from 2023 to 2026. It does not contemplate further conservation.
And is that assuming that, hoping that in 4 years, we've conserved enough water that eventually then we can go back?
In addition to the supplemental EIS process, there's another process that's going to be moving forward, which will look at, it is the post 2026 renegotiation of the 2007 interim guidelines. And they'll be contemplating what river operation will look like with all of the basin states, including IID and CPWD, California, Utah, Arizona. Everyone will be working on this kind of discussion on what the future looks like for the river and what the operations will look like in times of shortage and in times of surplus.
It was mentioned earlier that there's going to be a working group Will the Salton Authority, for example, Patrick O'Dowd as our executive director be part of those discussions moving forward?
Yes, absolutely. Well, there is a principal level coordination group
Right.
coming together to address issues at the sea. And yes, Patrick has been
To keep us
invited by
abreast
Secretary
as to
Crowell.
what's going on and
Yes.
if we're actually achieving conservation or not.
Yeah,
and
there will be
then-
briefings along those lines, I would imagine, yes, on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a follow-up question?
Yes, sir. However, I did have a question. Go ahead. Okay, go ahead. Mr. Carter.
If I may, thank you, Supervisor Kelly. Just wanted to piggyback in terms of the volunteer commitment. And I just wanted to understand if this premise was accurate, that the volunteer cuts would come after drought contingency cuts first, correct? Potentially, is that a position that the Bureau is willing to make in terms of priority of cuts? That DCP would those cuts would come first before any type of volunteer commitment, potentially on coming from the Imperial County?
That's, I'm not involved in any of those conversations, so it's not really anything I could even speak to in terms of what those negotiations and discussions would look like. There'd be something certainly that I think Henry would be willing to.
Would you potentially
discuss,
be
but-
supportive of those?
I can't, that's above my pay grade.
The interim guidelines, mandatory contributions and the voluntary contributions in DCP are happening anyway. When we, and what we're doing and this additional voluntary compensated contributions for short term are all going to be in addition to those. You're
And
going to
those-
need that much more.
Yeah.
The 2 to 4 million are going to need that.
And it's assuring to hear potentially the Bureau recommendation taking a position that those painful cuts would take place first prior to the volunteer commitments from Imperial Irrigation District.
Yes, yes.
Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Director Kelly.
I had a question for Mr. Butler.
Mhm.
In your present, oh, you don't have, you can stay if you want. Yeah.
Coming your way.
So in regards to what you've shared with us on the graphs is a 2.5 million acre foot need at the reservoirs. And I remember over the summer, the worry about the call for 2 to 4 million annually. A lot of dates were shared on, if not done by this day, it would be dictated. Those dates came and gone. And now you're sharing with us a forecast that is still not looking favorable. The demand on the system is still there. And even with the contribution that IAD has agreed to, there is a huge gap. And I don't see the sense of urgency in, I know that people are working on it, but it doesn't seem like it's getting the attention it needs.
Alan, I can take that one.
Thank you.
I think. The supplemental EIS that we're doing is rocket speed. Those types of environmental compliance documents normally take 2 years. And in that process, there is a federal action that will require those additional cuts. And that you're going to know where that is going to be rolled out in the summer of this year with implementation, starting in 2024. And if it's not enough, there'll be additional analysis done and possibly additional cuts. And then also with respect to the post 2026, as Jeremy said, there's 2 processes going on. This supplemental EIS for operations between 2024 and 2026. Post 2026 is when the interim guidelines expire and we'll be putting in new guidelines for a longer period of time.
So we've been living with the tiers on Lake Mead for a while.
Mhm.
And, you know, when we hit 1075, and then now what I'm seeing is we're at 1039. Are those fully being implemented across the lower basin of those triggers
Yes,
at 1050?
yes.
The second,
This,
the cuts
for
to,
2023 will be in tier 2A for mandatory requirements. So that's this year. That's this year's water. Yes.
okay.
Mhm. And then I think what we're seeing is and what the supplemental EIS is looking at is based on elevations. How much water really would it take to help keep the system whole? And then reclamation has stepped in to offer compensation for short-term agreements, and then also we're going to be announcing at the end of, I don't know, sometime in March, April, about our commitments for long-term durable solutions where we're going to fund projects. Some might be off-channel re-regulating water storage projects, possibly in an Imperial Irrigation District, or grass type projects, lawn replacement projects, or we're going to be putting out a proposal for that this spring to look at those type of activities as well to help, because at long term, the supply is not there to feed the demand. So we're gonna need to look at it differently.
Thank you.
If I may just add a comment to Supervisor Kelly's inquiry, is I do appreciate the fact that the Bureau gave us our full water order for 2023, considering the circumstances that we're dealing with in regards to hydrology, and understanding that there is a priority system. We were successful in getting our full water order for 2023. So I do appreciate that. And that is a silver lining.
Thank you, Director.
I do have no, go ahead. You talk about a supplemental lightning speed EIR. Is that only taking into consideration what happens to the lakes, or does that EIR also take into consideration what's happening to the communities and places such as the Salton Sea?
The environmental impact statements that we've done on the Colorado River, the interim guidelines, and what we're doing now in the supplemental, just look at the system operations. They don't go out any further into community, identify what those impacts would possibly be.
So am I hearing you say that there's an environmental assessment report that is not evaluating the environmental issues that it's causing? It's just
It's
looking at
looking
itself,
at the impacts within the system that we operate. That's correct.
but not to what it's causing to beyond your system.
No, I would agree with that.
Interesting.
Yes.
Earlier you talked about 200 million, where am I? 250 million, 22 million upfront, 228, right? We do know that some of the monies are already behind, and some of the obligations are backed up. I think to the tune of maybe $330 million. Now I see additional money coming for new mitigation. I hear that, perhaps items such as water saving measures and, will be in a competitive way. I guess I'm not understanding. It causes me concern, especially if we have to competitively fight or compete for those monies. Shouldn't they be coming to supplement the community instead of saying, figure out how this gets used between you, you fight it out? And it almost seems like not helping the community, but putting us in one way against each other. I know that late last year, there was a $4 billion budget passed, of which 1 billion is committed to this kind of work. Is that going to be budgeted or is it just going to be a document where it exists? Or the 250 that you alluded to part of that? Or is it the 1 billion, the 250 million and the hanging 330?
There's several appropriations measures that were being used to deal with the drought in the Colorado River. And the 250 million for this agreement came out of our bipartisan infrastructure law, which we got money. We also got money in the IRA legislation. And those decisions about where the pots of money are coming and going over time. But I think in answer to your initial question about impacts to the community, when we started talking about securing additional water for Lake Mead and voluntary compensated short-term agreements, we heard that from a lot of people about, I'm not gonna leash, I can't make money, I can't be held whole if I'm gonna only get $200 an acre foot for water that I would not use and would stay in need. So we came up with a 2-tier plan where we have what we called bucket 1A, which we're offering $400 an acre foot for 3 years. And then we came up with an alternative to that to say, in our bucket 1B said, you tell me what works for you and your district and your community and package that up and we'll take a look at that because we don't have all that information and we also don't want to, the commissioner is very clear about not wanting to spend all of those monies made available for drought on short-term measures that she's really interested in securing some long-term solutions that we're looking at.
So then and that would be from those 250 alluded to?
No, that's just for the agreement to work with the state on the Salton Sea Management Program is a 250 million. That's
Correct,
just
from
for
the
Salton Sea.
250,
Right.
right.
This is all different stuff.
So then if I understand you correctly, the 22 million would be upfront, those are committed.
23 million is up front.
Right.
The remainder. would
And then
come
the
online.
remainder is not really 228, it's up to 228. If enough projects are submitted and approved to take that money.
Correct.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, thank you.
And the idea is that with additional conservation and IID and Coachella, that there would be some acceleration of impacts to the sea. And we want to accelerate the projects in order to offset some of those impacts. That's the reasoning behind it.
I guess that's, if I may, Mr. Chair, I think that's part of the concern, right? The acceleration means that as far as the sea is concerned and around the sea in those communities like Desert Shores or North Shore, you have more exposed playa, which means more public health issues like asthma or respiratory illnesses. And so I'm wondering if there's any way to integrate into the conversation that you're having when it comes to conservation of water from the Colorado River. If there's any way in which you can integrate the conversation of the impacts that are going to be felt, that already are being felt, but are now going to be exponentially felt from the surrounding communities around the sea. And I think that's where, I don't want to speak for others, but I think that's where my colleague Luis, and maybe others are thinking about. And so I just want to put that out there. I don't know if you have a response for that now, but I hope that that does become part of the conversation.
And we'll go into great detail here as Tina presents on the impacts of the sea in terms of the modeling that the state performed over the summer to kind of assess this. So if the board will allow, we could transition to Peter and go from there, and Tina will be following him.
Just before Peter gets started, I'd just like to make a comment or an announcement. For those of you that have been texting or on the chat asking about where this video or this presentation is available. After this is over, you can go to saltonsea.com there's a tab that says meeting agendas. Look for today's date and you will find a link to today's video recording and meeting. Now, this is a Zoom product and Zoom takes an unknown amount of time to convert it before it uploads it. So in essence, it could, once we push the button, it could be done before the end of the day. It could be done tomorrow, or the day after. Just know that it is going up, but it is a Zoom product and it doesn't always load with the same expediency. SaltonSea.com, meeting agendas, look for today's date. You'll find a link there. Thank you. Peter?
Hey, good morning. Thank you, Chairman Carte and Board Executive Director O'Dowd. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. Appreciate the Bureau and of Reclamation. Thanks. And as well as the California Natural Resources Agency, who kind of come on board with this agreement. And just as kind of context to the water and the hydrology, thanks for leaving the slide 4 up, Alan. In 2000, when I came on the board of Coachella Valley Water District, Lake Powell and Lake Mead were 95% full. That's 46.5 million acre feet of water in the lakes with a capacity of 49 million. That was 2000. I spent a few years on the Salton Sea Authority Board in, I think it was 2009 to 2014. So I appreciate all of your service to the board that you're on now. It's a good board with keeping the community together to put forth the local issues regarding the sea. So appreciate that. From a 46.5 million acre foot storage supply, in 2023, combined storage between the two lakes is 12.9 million acre feet. So we went from 95% full to 26% full in 23 years. That's an average loss of 1.5 million acre feet a year. And of that quantity lost, 13 million acre feet's been lost in the last 5 years. And if you look at this unregulated inflow into Lake Powell that Alan is sharing, from 2018, 19, 20, 21, 22, we've lost this 13 million acre foot of storage. In 22, there was a runoff of about 6 million acre feet. In 21, it was 3.5 million acre feet. In 20, another 6 million acre feet. We had a great year in 19 at 13 million acre feet. And 2018 was 4.5 million acre feet. If you kind of look at this slide, there are some cycles where you have a wet and a dry, but it's all trending down. And this is the reality that we face on the Colorado River, is that we have a dwindling water supply. And we maintain that we have a 9 million acre feet plus demand in the lower basin. So if we're averaging in the last 5 years, as you can see, that we're averaging more in the range of about 7 million to 7.5 million acre feet, we're losing a lot of storage. And this is just the reality that we face. So then if you go to slide, Alan, if you could go to slide 8, I'll kind of talk about the responses that we've had on the river. And obviously we have the law of the river, which is the guideline for all of our activities with our priorities and our present perfected rights and the decrees. But since 2000, we did come up with the quantification settlement agreement in 2004, and then the 2007 shortage criteria, which has been obligating agencies and states to make cuts in the lower basin, as well as the 2019 drought contingency plan, which is really a voluntary plan now codified in Congress as mandatory, but it was a voluntary look at states making these cuts as lake levels would go down in it, and it really respected the law of the river and the priority system. So with that, both of the 07 guidelines and the 2019 DCP were really collaborative efforts between the 7 basin states, as they're doing now, trying to come up with a coordinated operating guidelines to both reservoirs that both states can agree upon in respect to the law of the river and the priority system. And so, so with that, you can see the success that we've had in the past in that with the 07 guidelines in 2019 here, DCP is lake levels would have been hovering around 990 elevation, close to power pool, minimum power pool, but instead their Lake Mead today is at lake level 1046. That's the physical lake level today. And in December 31st, it was 1044. So we're in this tier 2A that Jackie spoke of. So with that, there's this need to collaborate on a operating guideline between the 7 basin states because of the fact that the Bureau opened this supplemental environmental impact statement, which is the SEIS. And so they've been working, the states have been working very hard with that. In the meantime, in 2022 came up with this 500+ plan to generate most, Arizona's contributing a lot of this, and PVID and Coachella. And so we're contributing to the 500+ plan, but now we've agreed to 2023 making some contributions as well. Back earlier in 2022, the goals were of California is if we were going to make any additional cuts, they were going to be temporary, they were going to be voluntary, and they were going to be compensated. And this would be in the time frame leading up to the 2023 to 2026 interim period before we came up with new operating guidelines with the 7 states and the Bureau. So in response to that, the Inflation Reduction Act was approved with $4.1 billion of money with a priority of the Colorado River system. And the commissioner and Tootin and Assistant Secretary Trujillo have really supported that it be dedicated to the Colorado River system. And so California came up with a voluntary plan based on those criterias of up to 400,000 acre feet, of which bucket 1A would be $400 an acre foot in this compensated. Coachella's taken advantage of that with putting forth a bucket 1A proposal with the Bureau. It's in the Bureau right now and has already started to eliminate some of the aquifer recharge. And to those ends, there'll be even more local discussions with our water users and within the district about what that looks like and how we can utilize the funds in our community the best. IID has, and you'll probably hear more from Tina, but they've gone that bucket 1B, which is including is $400 plus, which then IID will come up with some justification as why the plus. And part of that justification will be community impacts in there. And so from to the point, I think in the last panel was that, hey, are there community impacts being considered? This is where they're being considered. So there is a process. We're looking forward also to the bucket 2, which is durable long-term investments. So what the Bureau would fund some conservation programs. We're looking for maybe some commercial turf removal. And then what we would do is we would use those monies to fund those projects, and the water would be set aside back to the system as a durable long-term conservation program. So that was temporary, voluntary compensated. And then the next item was to address the Salton Sea. And I think the Bureau has done a good job at providing some initial funds to get this going in the 23 million, 25 million or so forth. And then coming back with some efforts to fund the Salton Sea Management Plan from this Natural Resources Program that is contingent upon further conservation items. So, that's conditional, but it seems to be a good plan. So, and the last item that we had worked on were that the Bureau and the states, specifically California, come up with agreements that the Section 5 contractors boards could approve. So we have the Salton Sea agreement that we're talking about today. That's something that our boards approve. We're looking at the bucket 1A, 1B, Coachella's board approved. IID's board is considering that. And so, we've made a lot of progress with that. But without a 7 states collaborative plan, with addressing the operating guidelines under a supplemental environmental impact statement, the Bureau will come up with their own guidelines, which will be in accordance to what they have at their disposal in terms of the law of the river to protect these lake levels at 3525 and 1020 or thereabouts. And I mean, those would include, curtailments by priority and 417 action and health and safety supplies, which we don't have enough time to talk about today, but it's all kind of wrapped around with some secretarial discretion. And as the SEIS and the record of decision are opened up, those are actions that the Bureau is going to be looking for. So without a 7 basin states plan, the Bureau moves ahead. But certainly the Bureau, if there's no consensus on a plan, the Bureau, in my mind, my opinion, could probably pick and choose from what the states have come up with to date. So the hydrology is really telling us what to do. And we're trying to best protect California's water rights, the Salton Sea area of impacts. And so I'm hopeful we can, keep moving this process forward. So that was my presentation. Glad to answer any questions. I know we're running way late on time, but that's kind of my personal viewpoints and some of Coachella's perspective. So thank you.
Thank you, Peter, I'm sorry, Director Cardenas.
Yeah, Mr. Nelson, I appreciate you breaking down the funding mechanism between the Salton Sea mitigation funds and then also the IRA funds associated with the 1B tier funding. But I wanted to get your opinion on something in regards to the IRA 1B tier funding. Do you believe that some of that funding is eligible to mitigate economic impacts as a result to the hydrology?
Well, Alex, I don't know directly, but I will say this is that I do know that in the bucket 1B, the Bureau asks for a substantiation of the request for additional funding. So that most likely would be the area to concentrate on, in my opinion, to concentrate on on those types of discussions. So I think would be now between, IID's proposal and the Bureau.
Yeah, and I'm in agreement with your assumption. It's just I've been told otherwise that the IRA funding as it relates to the tier system, that they're not eligible for mitigating economic impacts. But
Yeah, and
again, I do appreciate your assumption.
Yeah, I don't know for the fact, but that would be where I would, include those types of discussions.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Director Cardenas. Any additional questions from directors, members of this body? Thank you, Peter.
Great, you're welcome. Thank you.
Mario, who's next?
So next we have Tina from Peru Irrigation District, giving an update on hydrology and how it relates to Salton Sea.
Ms. Shields, good morning.
Good morning. I'm hoping you can see my screen.
Yes. Do.
Okay, I've been asked to mimic the presentation I gave to our board last November as far as the parameters that were used in the modeling. So I'm going to cover those aspects, and then I will defer to the state on any actual questions on the model since they performed that analysis. Just let me see if I can get this on full screen.
Thank you.
So when we were just, pardon me?
Thank you. That full screen works a lot better.
Okay, so when we were in discussions with the water agencies and the state and federal representatives in trying to quantify what the amount of this agreement should be with regard to funding for the Salton Sea, those actual dollar amounts were negotiated privately between the state of California and Reclamation. So I can't weigh in on that, but they had asked us to help them determine what the level of impacts would be if these conservation proposals move forward. And let me reiterate, there is no agreement at this point in time by IID and Reclamation as to the conservation. IID's board has been very clear as we've been in discussions with the basin states and Reclamation that the Salton Sea needed to go first. And so this was the action that was meant to address that concern, is to make sure that the Salton Sea wasn't an afterthought in our voluntary proposals, that it came up front. So I just want to be clear that in order for IID to actually enter into agreements to provide the conservation that's contemplated in this analysis, there still is additional decisions and discretionary actions that have to be made. Peter Nelson mentioned one, which is the funding mechanism, but there are also other permitting and agreements to be negotiated and board authorizations to be obtained. So there's still a significant amount of work that needs to be done to get to an agreement that would authorize this conservation by IID. It's also a voluntary conservation proposal, so we would seek participation by our growers, and that amount and the style of programs have yet to be determined as well. So there's still many things that need to occur in order to trigger the actual conservation that would then result in this funding. So that being said, when developing the modeling for this, we were asked to provide the parameters to incorporate into that model. And then based on the discussions we had been having from an IID reclamation perspective, and similarly between the Coachella Valley Water District and Reclamation, the numbers that we had been discussing were approximately 250,000 acre feet a year over a 4-year term. I think Supervisor Perez had inquired about that. And then Coachella was contemplating approximately 35,000 acre feet a year. So those cumulative totals over that 4-year period would be up to 1 million acre feet with IID conservation efforts, and 140,000 acre feet over that 4-year period from 2023 to 2026. I will tell you that from a 2023 standpoint, the volumes will not be that high because there has been no funding decisions made, no programs developed, no agreements in place. So even when we start those, it will be later on in the year, which decreases the yield opportunities. So this is sort of the bookending of what would be the maximum amount of exposure that could occur under the likely scenarios. The picture to your right is, I think, helpful in understanding what I'm going to go through in the next two slides. It's the bathymetry of the Salton Sea, and you'll see as you get farther to the center, the sea is deeper. So the exposure we see early on, as far as an acreage, will be a much larger number with a volumetric relationship than as we get deeper into the sea, because then it will take more volumetric difference to make that similar acreage exposure. And we see that same sort of impact at Lake Mead. It used to be that a foot of elevation was about 100,000 acre feet of water. And these days it's dropped down to probably close to 70,000 acre feet because you have that teacup shape. So it's a similar concept here as far as the impacts, that you have a lot more early on due to the shallow nature of the shoreline. So again, the commitments for the proposals from IID and Coachella were 250,000 acre feet a year from the south end of the sea and 35,000 acre feet a year from Coachella at the north end. It's a limited duration, up to 4-year proposal. After 2026, that's when the 2007 interim guidelines expire, and there's a whole new management regime that will have to be adopted by reclamation, and a whole new decision-making process as far as how to address the hydrology that's in place in future years. So from an IID perspective, there's two things we look at. What types of conservation are we likely to be implementing? From an efficiency conservation standpoint, that's our highest priority and what we will be very aggressive in trying to do as much as possible to increase the amount of conservation that our growers are able to generate through on-farm field level technologies such as drip and sprinklers and pump back systems, or additional land leveling to reduce their water use, but yet still be able to grow the same amount of crop or potentially even increase their yields. When you do efficiency conservation, it's a greater impact than fallowing style conservation, because every acre foot of conservation is an acre foot of field runoff that would have gone to the Salton Sea. So it's a one-to-one relationship. Alternatively, if we implement fallowing, which we haven't done since 2017, that was the limited duration of our initial fallowing related to the QSA, that's a 3-to-1 ratio, because when you fallow a field, if there would have been, say, 3 acre feet used on that field, historically speaking, the crop would have used 2 acre feet and there would have been an acre foot of runoff. So in order to look at the impacts to the Salton Sea, it's only a 1 acre foot impact for every 3 acre feet of conservation you generate. And that's why we had the fallowing early on in the QSA, was to minimize the impacts during that 15-year planning period when the state was to be developing restoration and mitigation options to implement. So the chart on the right is looking at 2 scenarios that we looked at. One was 100% fallowing, which would sort of be the lowest level impacts over this period of time. And the other was a hybrid methodology, which assumed 50,000 acre feet of efficiency conservation and 200,000 acre feet of fallowing. At IID, we're not fans of fallowing. It's, another one of those F words you've heard me mention over the years. But the reality is the ability to get 250,000 acre feet of increased efficiency in the near term. In our discussions with growers, we just don't think that's likely to happen. And so what we anticipate is we could probably be super aggressive on our on-farm program with sufficient funding and squeeze another 50,000 acre feet in this near 4-year term period. But at that point, in order to get the full volume potential that is being proposed, we would have to implement some sort of seasonal fallowing or rotational fallowing program. The minute you start to do that, you're taking ag lands out of production, which actually then decreases the potential for the on-farm conservation. But it's just the reality when you look at the conservation that IID is already obligated to and what this proposed new plan would be. Currently, we have an annual entitlement of 3.1 million acre feet, but 500,000 acre feet on average are conserved for existing conservation obligations. That's about 16% of IID's water supply. Even when we enter into supplemental agreements for this 4-year term, if you add another 250,000 onto that existing conservation, it bumps up the IID obligation to nearly 24% of its water supply. So it is a heavy lift on a community that has already stepped up to address water supply reliability issues within the state the last 20 years with the execution of the conservation program. Pointing your attention towards the line graph on the right, what we found is that if you implement the least impactful option to the Salton Sea, which is an all fallowing program, you would see just about 5,600 acre feet of accelerated playa exposure in that near term, peaking at the end of that 4-year period. But then as water flows return back to normal, and yes, that's a big caveat, will they return back to normal given the hydrology? The playa exposure starts to decline and go back into what we would consider the pre-existing condition under the QSA. And ultimately, if you look out to 2047, which is the end term of the Salton Sea QSA agreements, those projections show only an additional 400 acre feet of playas exposed. So you're speeding up exposure that was already anticipated to occur under the existing agreements. While fallowing is the least impactful to the Salton Sea, conversely, it's the most impactful to the community, and we all know that. So when we looked at maximizing our potential for efficiency over this 4-year term, we have this hybrid model. The Salton Sea modeling projections indicated based on this level of program implementation, we could have up to 8,200 acre feet of additional playa exposure at that peak period. But then again, over time, because you're accelerating playa that would have been exposed in the future, you only end up at the end of that QSA period with about 800 acres of new additional playa exposure. And really that's because of that bathymetry picture I showed you earlier that shows you start to reach those deeper areas of the sea. So this is just, again, a slide summarizing where that additional acreage exposure would occur in that bluish gray color on the right, highlighting that you see the ramping up as the conservation occurs. This, again, because we're not involved in a program as of yet, and those approvals and programs have not been implemented, would end up being smaller than what these projections show. And then over time, you can see that the range of the potential exposure, new acre playa exposed, is about 400 to 800 acre feet. So with that, I'm going to turn back the screen to you. And if there's any particular questions with regard to this presentation, I can answer, and any specific modeling questions, I'll defer to the state.
Thank you, Ms. Shields. I do have at least one question.
Yeah, I do want to just, to my colleagues, and this is very important information. And actually, it's probably the most critical part of these representing Imperial Irrigation District, is that the footnote that Ms. Tina shared is extremely important. The responsibility of this analysis comes from the state. We did participate in providing information, but at the end of the day, this analysis does come from the state. And I made numerous inquiries in terms of the numbers and the analysis. Now, whether or not that analysis came from the Department of Water Resources, Tetra Tech, or whoever, whatever vendor or engineering firm is being considered here. But I have been told repeatedly that this analysis is an analysis done on behalf of the state, and they're the author of that analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Cardenas. Do we have any additional questions from members of this body? Okay, let's go on to the next presenter.
Right, Jeremy Brooks, Bureau of Reclamation. I feel like we've already teased out some of the components of the agreement, but I'm going to walk through it. Before they do that, I'm going to read the title of the agreement once, and we'll never read it again. It is the commitment to support Salton Sea management related to water conservation in the Lower Colorado River Basin at the Salton Sea. And I'll refer to it as the commitments agreement moving forward. So the objective of the agreement is just fundamentally to speed up the state's work at the sea in terms of implementation of the Salton Sea Management Plan, 10-year plan. There are fundamentally kind of two components to it, and it's really two separate agreements. You can think of it that way in a sense. And do I have a presentation that's done by chance?
It should be.
not much to it, just 3 pages, but maybe we can fire it up for. While we're waiting for that, just, one note that as the voluntary conservation discussion was just starting, and Commissioner Tootin kind of addressed Congress on the topic, almost the very first place she came was the Salton Sea. It was one of the very first conversations that was had regarding how to conserve water on the river. So I think there was a lesson learned from the DCP in that process, and this was a priority for her and the agency. So I don't know if we're going to get the presentation up or not, but oh, okay. We'll just go.
Need some coffee? Anybody want some coffee?
I'll go get the water. You get the coffee.
A cheeseburger.
Cheeseburger.
De pescado. Tacos Marlin. I just emailed you that presentation. Okay. Oh.
Still waiting? You want to hear a joke?
Yeah, go for it. Sorry.
It can be, yes.
Making an inquiry to you.
Okay, so with that, as we work out the technical difficulties, I'll move forward on this. So, like I said, there's 2 fundamental kind of sections of the agreement. There are those things that we can do right now that all of the parties to the agreement agree to. And then there are those things that can be done in the future if there's a voluntary conservation agreement that we enter into. So I'm going to walk through that first kind of section, actions that we will take immediately. So the first subsection of the agreement, I'm just going to hit the highlights here, is to provide 20 million to the state of California to expedite implementation of the 10-year plan, the SSMP. And that just to clarify, it's IRA funding that is in the bank and available. It is in my budget, and as is the remainder of the 228 million. The other component of this is 2 million to the Torres Martinez tribe to support with, you can go to the second slide, to support with staffing and technical support to assist in their efforts to manage and work at the sea. So that is the second component there. And then there is a kind of a component related to research and science that is kind of a continuing commitment that Reclamation and the state and all of the parties in and around the sea will continue that effort. So the next subsection is land access. And this is a big issue for the state. The state does not have a lot of land in and around the sea, and they rely on IID and the Department of Interior to implement their projects. So the objective here is to enter into programmatic land use agreements that will expedite that process because it can be lengthy and time consuming and delay projects. So The goal here is to get almost like an umbrella agreement in place that will expedite the issuance of those land access agreements. The next piece here is water supply for SSMP projects. This is also important when you're doing aquatic restoration. IID has committed to 100,000 acre feet of new river flows, which drain flows from ag and storm runoff, to support projects like the SCH on the south end of the sea. CVWD contemplates providing 24,000 acre feet to support projects on the north end of the sea, and that's also ag drainage and storm flow runoff. The next piece is improving permitting and contracting. There's a lot kind of that falls under this piece here, but largely speaking, the state has agreed to take very aggressive contracting actions to expedite the implementation of their SSMP, including as-build style contracts to get projects on the ground quickly. This also is a broad commitment from Interior to work to expedite our own internal processes in terms of things like NEPA compliance and ESA compliance, and the same thing from the state. And then our last subsection here is really Secretary Crowfoot's most cherished piece of this agreement, which is the principals meeting that will happen on a quarterly basis. And the goal is to get a number of high-level executives together on a regular basis to meet, to identify problems, to tackle those problems and cut through issues as they arise or before they arise so that delays aren't experienced. So the Salton Sea Authority has been invited to sit on that board. The Torres Martinez tribe has been invited to sit on that board. A number of federal agencies will sit on that board, as well as CNRA, IID, CVWD, et cetera. So there's all of those kind of stakeholders are coming together to meet regularly to make sure that we tackle issues at the sea. So that is the first section of the agreement. And then the second section are those things that will be done if a voluntary conservation agreement is entered into, and this is quite simple. It's $225 million to the state of California to implement the SSMP. And then another $3 million to IID and CVWD to provide staffing and technical support to assist in implementation of projects at the sea. The goal here is to make sure that as much of these federal dollars go to projects on the ground, bar none, and that we speed up work and help and assist the state in speeding up work as much as we can. So that is the agreement in a nutshell. And if you have any questions, we'll be here available for Q&A, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
So this concludes our presentation. I guess I'll open it up for board questions or questions from the public.
Before we go on to our next item, any questions from members of this body?
Yeah, if I may ask to get an update on the vacancy regarding the assistant secretary position. We're at a very critical time, and that we have this funding, but we don't necessarily have a lieutenant or someone that's going to quarterback. I just don't foresee Secretary Crowfoot managing and implementing these type of operational commitments. And can you just give me some sort of comfort that there will be effort made to fill that vacancy that's been left unfilled for the last 7 months?
Yeah, I mean, there's been an effort. I guess maybe I'll turn it over to Lisa Lane Mager, our senior advisor for communications, who I believe is on the line still.
Yes, I'm here. Thanks, Mario. Thank you for the question. And we are actively working on filling that role. We agree that it's very important and it's a high priority for us. So we are actively working on it, and we'll work to keep you updated as we proceed. Thank you.
Do you have an anticipated timeline? I'm hearing about stakeholder meetings and I know that this eventually is going to probably come back to our board. And again, I just do not have the comfort in terms of us moving forward, at least me personally, unless that position is filled. So is there an anticipated timeline on when that position would be filled?
No, I don't really have a specific timeline that I can cite right now, but I will tell you that we are actively working on it and it's a high priority for us. But we're, very glad that we do have other members of our team. As you know, we have expanded our presence down there at the sea with Mario and Miguel and others that have been added to our team. So we are, continuing to be able to work on our various initiatives. We really want to continue the momentum that we feel like we have built. So, happy to keep you updated when we have more information on timeline.
In regards to the $23 billion deficit that this state is facing in 2023, 2024, do you anticipate any disruptions in funding as it relates to Salton Sea projects?
I think I can answer that one as well. The January 10th budget that was proposed by Governor Newsom retains all the funding that we had identified for the Salton Sea.
Thank you.
Lisa, I do have a quick question. Going back to the previous question about the hiring of this person. Is that in this year's budget or does that not start until the next fiscal budget?
The position remains in our budget.
Thank you.
Just very quickly, Mr. Chair, you're referring to the assistant secretary, but I know that there were also conversations around outreach, public relations positions on the ground on behalf of the Salton Sea Authority as well. Is that part of this funding stream or is that something separate, Patrick?
Yeah, that's a separate contract that we entered into with the state late last year. Actually in September of last year for community engagement, outreach, education. And we have been implementing that. We're doing some work now with the state and Better World Group on community amenities and otherwise.
But wasn't that supposed to be a position though, a full-time position, or is
At
that
the authority,
right?
yes.
And we actually had that individual, or is that the work?
We are pursuing that
Okay,
opportunity right now.
all right. And when is that going to be?
I expect to begin that process. I've been working with Riverside County, and I expect to begin that process the beginning of next month.
All right, thank you.
Okay, no, there being no.
I have, if I could.
Go ahead, sir.
Jeremy, in your presentation, you said the section 2, the funding is, I believe that's the 250 million, is to expedite the 10-year plan for the Salton Sea. But the 10-year plan is the 30,000 acres that was identified by the Water Board to mitigate the impacts of the 2003 transfer. Why would you use new money to mitigate liability? That's the responsibility of the state under a 2003 agreement. I think that there's concerns, and we've had conversations about this. And I believe this. First, I want to acknowledge this is a very complex issue, and it has to be addressed responsibly. But I want to make sure, my concern is that we don't recognize the gravity of this situation. That $250 million is sufficient to address these concerns as we launched into this. Last time we talked, Secretary Crowfoot, I believe it was in Secretary Crowfoot's and Commissioner Towton's letter where they said this was going to be addressed in an adaptive management fashion. But 250,000 acre feet of water is larger than the original QSA transfer. And I appreciate Ms. Shields' comments with respect to the teacup and the effect. That does make some sense to me. But we are relying, IID is not relying, but the community has to rely on an analysis of the state of the impacts of these proposed actions. And the only question is, what if it's not right? And what if the impacts are far more severe? And how do we, who do people go to address their impacts?
There's a lot to unpack.
Well, it was a simple question.
Yeah, so just in terms of the funding piece, that range was, and that number was sort of picked from a variety of kind of positions. The first of all, it was consistent with what was requested during the DCP negotiations and what was solicited from this board from the Department of Agriculture as the DCP was moving forward. It's also consistent with what Congress was contemplating for the C as well. So that was sort of served as the basis. In terms of some of the public outreach and other components, I'd lean on the state for that component. But not sure if Mario or Tom or Lisa could kind of speak to that piece, and then the modeling, of course, it would also be the state.
Yeah. Yeah, I would just say that, I mean, yeah, there's obviously more funding needed. And this is to expedite, I mean, we have funding now and we're at the end of completing our NEPA process to expedite permitting for projects that we have detailed project descriptions for. But the biggest part of this commitment is also the commitment by landowners to expedite land access agreements so that we can continue to implement these projects. And so is it enough? I don't think it's enough, but it's a great first start, I guess, from receiving funding from our federal partners. So I think it's just going to continue to accelerate our projects and get them moving faster. And I think it's going to help us spend the money that we have and this new funding quicker so that we can catch up to acreage targets. And I guess the work continues. We have a whole second phase 2 of a long range plan that needs funding as well.
Thank you. Before we go on to item 5C and 5D, let's go ahead and take a 10-minute bio break. Let's be back by at 25 after the hour.
Before we do that, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to thank our state and federal partners for taking the time to meet with us today. It's important. I think that they know it's important for them to know that we view ourselves as partners in this challenge, but we have concerns about the impacts to our community, and we appreciate everybody coming in and visiting with us and listening to the concerns that we've heard from the community and make sure that we all work to the best of our ability to get this right the first time.
Connecting to retrans. All right. Excellent. We are now back, resuming our meeting. Next items, I will go ahead and allow Patrick to introduce item item C and item D. That's 5C and 5D.
Mr. President, on item C, I just wanted to update the board. As you already know, on December 16th, we signed the agreement with the Corps of Engineers in the state for a feasibility study for the Salton Sea. I think it's a 3-year, $3 million project, and it's informed by the state's long-term plan. We did have a preliminary meeting on this earlier this week. Mr. Newcomb and myself met with federal representatives to begin laying out what a schedule which will be provided by the Corps. It'll be a public process as we move forward. We'll have numerous opportunities for the community to engage with this. We're expecting that within the next week, we'll have a more robust meeting with the framework of what that schedule looks like, and I'll report back at that time. There is a memo in the board packet for your consideration, and that's all I have to report on this item.
Thank you. Now going on to item 5D.
Item 5D, we subsequent to preparing our 2023 calendar, it came to our attention that the Coachella Valley Water District boardroom will be renovated this summer. As a result of that, we need to find alternative locations or make other arrangements with respect to that. Well, it just so happens that 2023 is the 30th anniversary of the Salton Sea Authority. And the date that the June meeting, I believe it was June 24th, is the date that we received notification from the state that we were authorized to exist. So we're going to be looking for another venue to have a special meeting on that day to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the Salton Sea Authority. And with respect to the August meeting, Mr. President, we typically have a summer meeting that we take off. We put a meeting on the calendar for every month in anticipation of a complex year, given the situation on the Colorado River and otherwise. But at this time, I think unless something comes up that's extremely urgent, we're going to plan to cancel the August meeting.
Okay. So noted. That August meeting will have a question mark in my calendar instead of a cancellation. We now go on to item 6, reports. We'll start with our federal partners.
Mr. President, I just received notice that Ms. Moore had to run into another meeting. She stuck around as long as she was able. There is a written report in your package, and I also want to thank her for her help in helping inform and educate me and thusly the board on all the important federal issues relating to these matters.
Echo that. Going on to item B, state advocacy report.
Hi, directors. Happy New Year. It's good to be with you today. I will be just brief. So 2 items that I wanted to report on. So earlier this month, the governor released his budget for the upcoming year. And as Ms. Lisa pointed out, the good news for us is that the governor did include the remaining $80 million from his 2021 pledge to invest $220 million in the Salton Sea in this year's budget. Now, the language is a little vague. It actually targets the $80 million towards continued implementation of the California Water Plan. I would certainly, recommend to the board that as conversations are taking place, that we look to secure amendments that more specifically direct those $80 million towards Salton Sea efforts, just so that there's some certainty about where those dollars are going to go. But it was certainly good news that despite a pretty significant budget deficit, that they did meet their commitment of that additional $80 million. Now, as part of the budget, one of the things that was interesting is that the governor did announce his desire to have a resources general obligation bond as a way to offset some of the significant cuts that his budget proposes to some of his climate and clean transportation programs. We don't know the size of the bond or the exact programs that the governor is going to look to fund, but for the authority, the prospect of a bond is a unique opportunity to secure additional resources for the Salton Sea. As the conversations a little bit earlier were indicating, we're not entirely sure if those dollars that were made available from this agreement will be enough to meet impacts on the surrounding community. So the bond will certainly be a venue where we could start having those conversations to secure a significant inflow of dollars once that bond is adopted. Now, one thing that I was able to confirm is that our very own Assembly member Eduardo Garcia is planning to introduce the Assembly's version of that resources bond. So it's a great opportunity for us to engage with him and really start outlining what we would like to see reflected in that bond. Since, as things would have it with these revenue bonds is that they don't come very often. So this is likely the last one we'll see for a significant period. So we certainly want to try and extract as much as possible from that bond conversation. It's very likely that we'll see another bond introduced in the Senate. That author hasn't yet emerged. My sense is that it will probably be Senator Ben Allen, who was the previous author of the resources bond. But again, the fact that Mr. Garcia is the author does present us with an opportunity to really get in front of him to secure those dollars for the Salton Sea going forward. And those are the 2 items that I wanted to update the board on.
Horacio, thank you very, very much. We now go to State of California, Mr. Miguel Hernandez.
Everybody, thank you, Chairman and members of this board. My name is Miguel Hernandez. I'm the Public Affairs Officer with the Natural Resources Agency under the Salton Sea Management Program. And I just also have a couple updates for you. First, I just want to announce that we have a new member on our team with the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Her name is Analisa Saldaña. She's filling in a position that became vacant last year. So she's filling that position again as a staff services analyst, and she's actually based out of our Bermuda Dunes office. She's tasked with more like administrative tasks supporting the whole SSMP program. The other update I have, very important, the the draft long-range plan document. It's out for review. This was released mid-December last year. Currently, we only have an English version. We're hoping to have a Spanish version in the coming days. Once we have the Spanish version out, we will announce a 45 comment period to, give another opportunity for interested parties to comment on this. As you all might know, this draft took about a year, probably a little longer, multiple meetings with the Long Range Plan Committee, with community members, hosting community workshops. It was a very robust effort to get this draft in place. So very encourage every interested party to comment on this. They can submit comments via email to saltonc.lrp@resources.ca.gov, and also using via regular mail to the California Natural Resources Agency, to our Sacramento office headquarters, which is 715 P Street, 20th floor, Sacramento, California, 9584. Again, invite everyone to comment on this draft. This is a very important process for the long-term restoration of the sea. And again, hope to have the Spanish version out in the coming days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hernandez. Now we move on to agenda item B3, Salton Sea State Recreation Area. Mr. Corteri, are you online? Okay, going on to item 6C, Salton Sea Action Committee, Mr. De Lara, the day of we're about to hear it.
Yeah, you'll hear it. You will definitely hear it. Muy buenas tardes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, staff, and all those present in person and virtual. I'm delighted to present our brief report on behalf of President Ellen Pace and our board of directors. Talking about anniversaries, the Salton Sea Action Committee celebrated its 10th anniversary last year in June. Obviously, we didn't do much of a celebration, but we're just going to celebrate with a continued service and hopefully another decade of service to our community and to the Salton Sea Authority and CNRA and all our other partners. We do this through with 4 elements. 1 is education and outreach, 2 advocacy, 3 fundraising, and the 4th is public-private partnership opportunities. We're doing a lot of legwork, a lot of foundational work. We met with Mr. Patrick O'Dowd. We're going to continue having meetings on a regular basis. We're going to have more meetings to develop and implement a strategic partnership on how to best use the SAC resources and to support the Salton Sea Authority. Also, over the next several months, we have plans to continue and resurrect our stakeholder meetings. Those meetings are important for information sharing, advocacy, and support of each other's activities and events and programs. We're also going to focus a membership drive for Imperial County. We lost 3 of our big Imperial County members, representatives, Doug Beers, Dennis Rieger, and Mitch Mansfield. So we're hoping to recoup some of those losses over the next several months. Our roadshow, we're working on that as well. That is a community presentation that we take out to Rotary clubs, trade organizations, and all other community groups. And we make sure that the message is disseminated, and that message is a message that's directed by you, the Salton Sea Authority, and the CNRA as well. Our virtual tour, that's going to be up and coming. We are laying down the groundwork. We've met with Coachella Valley Unified School District, West Shores High School, Desert Mirage, and in the near future, we'll be meeting with other schools such as Calipatria High School to help us develop that virtual tour. Funding, as you know, last year we were a $5,000 sponsor of the summit. We also funded a very exciting project with UCR, and that was the Salton Sea Summit Scholarship Award. And this was awarded to UCR scholars who actively participate in the Salton Sea Summit, but more importantly, engage in the post-summit documentation, translation, and dissemination efforts. The award recipients were expected to generate Salton Sea Summit report by transcribing and summarizing the conference sessions, Once the report is finalized, the award recipients will help disseminate and publicize it, including outreach on social media. The funding was for $10,500. There were four, and I'll read the names very quickly. Charlie Diamond, he's a postdoctoral scholar, Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences at UC Riverside. Sahar Farouzan, a graduate student, Department of Anthropology at UC Riverside. Carolyn Hung, a graduate student, Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences. And Ariana Fireball Ornelius, graduate student, Department of Evolution, Ecology, and Organismal Biology. So those are the four students that we funded. And the report, I'm happy to report, did come out, I believe it was January 1st. And I'm looking at it here. And if you don't have it, we'll make sure that we get you a copy. We recently helped and supported the Well Tour, water education for Latino leaders. I was headed up by Director Estrada as well as Mr. O'Dowd. We're going to sponsor the lunch, and we also provided other logistical support, such as reserving and setting up one of the rooms that they use for a meeting out in Oasis. We also extend our deepest appreciation for all the members that are retiring, especially to Jim Hanks. He continues to be a Padrino, a mentor personally, and for us collectively as SAC. He provided tremendous leadership and support and wisdom to help us establish SAC back in the early 2010s or 2011 when we first started putting this together. So thank you, Mr. Hanks, and we wish you well. 40 years ago, my wife and I eloped. We're going to celebrate 40 years tomorrow. And in that honor, they created National Spouses Day. So that's what it is today, National Spouses Day. That concludes my report, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. De Lara. Mr. O'Dow, how do you follow that one up?
I think I just go to the house. No, I start by thanking the Salton Sea Action Committee to be one of our many strategic partners that help us get things done and tell the story and of the challenges and opportunities at and around the sea, and thank them for their sponsorship. I actually was able to participate in that session with the Water Education for Latino Leaders session last Saturday, and they took a tour of the yacht club. They grilled me for about an hour on pertinent issues. The questions about, it's not just the questions about the Salton Sea Authority, it's about the Salton Sea generally that is not well understood. Yeah. And anything we can do to tell our story, anything we can do to amplify our message is a good thing. So I'm still waiting for the check for the sandwiches, Juan, but I think I appreciate your offer.
In the mail.
Good. A couple other things I want to comment on quickly. Mr. Sefton mentioned about the Desert Shores project. We have been working with Imperial County on finalizing what that RFP will look like. We had a meeting 2 weeks ago. We're meeting again today on that issue. The representatives from the Bureau will also be meeting with us. With the primary issue is assigning responsibilities on how that's going to get done. There is a meeting of the group on the whole, including the state representatives, the first part of next month. And I think it's time and important and appropriate to find a date on the calendar in the near term to have a community visit on that, so they're brought into the conversation. So I'm committed to doing that. The North Lake project, we're continuing through the design process, wrestling through some challenges with access. The agreement we talked about for an hour today has a provision in it with regard to expedited permitting. The site access for site work for evaluation under conventional terms could take as long as 2 years, we're being told, to access some federal lands. We're hoping that agreement will allow us to cut through the red tape and get these projects on the ground and up and running. The other question that the county is wrestling with, and we're concerned about on this project, as in addition to projects as a whole, is who's going to own, operate, and pay for the operations of these assets when they come online. I'm confident that question will be part of the feasibility study, but the authority has been in discussions with the state, and we've recently learned that other NGOs have been in similar discussions about the prospects of a conservancy that might own these assets at the end of the day. It might not be the right solution, but it's a conversation that's taking place, and I just want to bring it to the attention to the board. I visited with Frank Ruiz earlier this week, who had been working on that, and he and I are going to collaborate with various stakeholder groups to see if we can work together on advancing that concept and see what makes sense. What do we collectively do with this stuff when it's done? And that concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Mr. O'Dowd. If there are no additional comments or remarks, before we adjourn this meeting, our next meeting will be on February 23rd. That one will still be at the Coachella Valley Water District, Patrick?
It will.
It will. So we will see you there. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
I saved it by a minute.
Well, I was whirlwind.